So on that note, I think it's a great place to get started. So thank you all for joining us. My name is Margaret Zolke. I'm the Career Advisor and Alumni Relations Specialist for the Halijolu Data Science Institute at UC San Diego. For those of you who are new and aren't really sure what the Halijolu Data Science Institute is, the Institute's mission is to lay the groundwork for scientific foundations of this emerging field, to develop new methods and infrastructure, and to train students, faculty, and industrial partners to use data science in ways that will allow them to solve some of the world's most pressing problems. The Institute serves as a unique, collaborative, and innovative academic unit across multiple disciplines at UC San Diego. So today is the second workshop of our Ramp Up for Recruitment series that the Halijolu Data Science Institute is hosting along with the Data Science Student Society, also known as DS3. And so I'll turn it over to Ayush Moore, the head of events or the head of event director for the Data Science Student Society, to share a little bit more about that.
Cool. Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, so today we have our second event for our Ramp Up series for recruitment event. I'm so excited to show this event because we have both Nick and Kevin presenting on this and giving us some insight on how the data science interview is. So before we get into that, I just want to tell you guys a little bit about DS3. So the Data Science Student Society, or DS3, is a student organization at UC San Diego, created in order to be a hub for all students interested in data science, regardless of their skill level or major. The goal of our organization is to provide resources and a community where UC San Diego students can learn about data science tools and further their career. We hold both social and professional events throughout the school year where students can connect with other students with similar interests, meet with the industry professionals, and build their data science skill set. We also have a Medium blog, which has a variety of articles on different topics in order to immerse students with the diverse facets of data science, as well as a podcast where we interview industry personnel and UCSD data science faculty. In addition to this, we host workshops throughout the school year where students can develop their technical data science toolkit, which can be applied throughout quarterly projects and for interview preparation. If you want to learn more about DS3, we have our own website, ds3ucsd.com. And without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Nick and Kevin to talk about the data science interview.
Thanks, you guys, for having us. I really appreciate, the 54 of you guys who are on this phone call to come, jam with us about the data science job hunt generally, and then also, of course, the data science interview. You guys can go to the next slide, I guess. Mostly this is going to be like a ask us anything. So I guess a lot of the questions end up being about our backgrounds. So Kevin, you want to give it a start?
Sure. So my name's Kevin. I went to Penn. I studied CS Stats and Finance. After graduating, I went to Facebook, worked on Facebook groups. And currently I'm at a small hedge fund in New York. Sort of the inception for a lot of this started, as an undergrad. I was basically pivoting from software engineering to data science and didn't find that many resources. So have come up with this, like this weekly newsletter that helps, that sends problems to you, as being like kind of like the first inception of what we are now.
Awesome. Yeah. And then, as I mentioned, right, Kevin and I went to high school together. We stayed friends while we were in college. I went to the University of Virginia. And then we became roommates when we started our new grad jobs at Facebook. I was on Facebook's growth team. Kevin was a data scientist on groups. And then I also found my way into this general career space. Some of you guys have probably seen me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there, posting about resume tips and job hunting skills, as well as just my own experience, just doing a bunch of random stuff like startups, and I also DJ for fun, so just post about that too on LinkedIn, which is kind of weird, but it's fun. So in college I interned at Google Nest Lab data infrastructure team. And then I also interned at a data science defense contractor and did some work for the intelligence community. So I've been kind of around the data world and then also software engineering world. One weird thing is I gave up all the technical stuff for a little bit of time and joined Safecraft, a data startup, to be their first marketing hire. So there, my whole job was seeing It was like a data company, and we were selling data to data science teams and machine learning teams. We were selling alternative data sets to basically finance hedge funds. So people like Kevin, basically, we were selling data to them, as well as ad tech companies and retail analytics companies. So basically, I got to see a different side of the data world. So that's kind of our background of how I've sort of been around data. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. We're kind of here just to talk about this book as well. It's called Ace the Data Science Interview. So as Kevin mentioned, right, we also felt that there were a lack of resources, which is why we decided to team up and write this one. We had thought it would be out by September end, but it's probably October 7th-ish. It's going to be about 200 pages. It's going to be sold on Amazon, and it's going to be great. So we're already done writing it, and it's just being edited right now for technical correctness and proofread by professionals. So yeah, me and Kevin are just chilling, getting to talk about what's going to come out pretty soon. So we're excited for that. Next slide. We also encourage you to join our Insta, Ace the Data Science Interview. We post interview questions. Sometimes I show my face and just go on a little rant. And we offer kind of a way just for you to practice the actual like data science interview questions, and also post some career advice. So that's definitely one good way to keep in touch with us, and we'll share some others. But that's kind of what we're about, what we're doing. And next slide. Before we, open it up, I think that one of the things that Margaret had mentioned was, in this audience, well, probably a lot of you have probably heard like, hey, you need a PhD to do data science, or you need like 5 years industry experience, right, to get a job. And, when we've talked to a lot of students, we've also heard that, like, oh, what's the point? Like, I should just by default go to grad school, or by default, like, hey, I shouldn't even apply. I'm not going to get the job. And a lot of folks also fall into this kind of catch-22 of where you need experience for the job, and then to get the job, you actually needed past experience, right? So you get confused. What do you do? And this is especially the case for people who are trying to get their first internship, and something, both me and Kevin faced. So it's definitely a tricky situation. We feel you, but we're here to tell you, like, there's a lot you can do, and there's a way to escape this catch-22. And undergrads can definitely do data science. And I know some of the people in this own chat, have had pretty kick-ass data science internships and maybe new grad offers. So it's definitely possible. So we'll talk a little bit about that before we open it up. So go to the next slide. Yeah, so one thing of how we approach job hunting, this is true for data science, but also how I advise software engineers as well as product managers. So it's pretty applicable. You may have heard of this book called The Lean Startup. It's a pretty famous book in Silicon Valley about making a startup. And they talk about the build, measure, learn philosophy. And I think that's a really good framework to even think about your own job hunt. Okay, so what do they tell you for a startup? And I'm a big startup guy. So let's talk about the startup for a second, right? You build a product, then you put it out there in the world and you see what happens. You measure its success. If it doesn't work, you reflect on it, you do some customer interviews, you see what went wrong, and then you build to fix that problem, and you keep going through that cycle. So that's kind of the way startups iterate on their products. And I think you could think of your own career as a product that you're going to improve on. And this career is like a 30, 40-year long product, and you guys are like basically at stage 0, really, honestly, of that career. So there's going to be a lot of building, measuring, and learning as you go about, but it's a good framework to think about each step and every step you take in your career through this lens. So what do I mean by build, measure, learn for like a career? So the building part comes with building really good portfolio projects. So I'll share a link in a second, but we have a whole blog on how do you build portfolio projects that get people really interested. And we'll open that up to questions as well, and I'll send that link in a second. But I think that's one of the best things you can do in the build phase. And a lot of you guys in school are in that build phase right now. Another one is get your hard skills up, right? And that's just like doing well in your classes, doing well in your class projects. The measure phase. Now this is where it starts getting interesting. So build, you're already building in school. What does the measure mean for your career? It means you should go and put yourself out there. And I think that's one of the things that me and Kevin have seen in our own careers is that if you've done a good job of building, if you have real portfolio projects and real hard skills, it's up to you then to put yourself out there and pursue opportunities and not wait for them to come to you. So how do you do that? It means sending cold emails. And I'm a big believer of sending a cold email. In case you don't know what that is, that's when you write to somebody you didn't know. So as opposed to getting a warm introduction to someone, these days, it's pretty okay and pretty normal to write to somebody you don't know. And I think that was something I didn't really realize in college. And then I kind of learned it later on, and then it became my superpower. And that's actually how I got interviews at Airbnb and Snapchat, as well as a job. My last job at Safegraph came from cold emailing the CEO. So that's what I mean by measuring. I mean, send cold emails and see, do people respond? Do people want to meet you? Is it like, if they don't, that means you probably need to work on your portfolio projects and how you pitch yourself. If you could go back to the slide one more time. Yeah. And go fail some interviews. That's part of measuring. So what do I mean by that? Like we call ourselves Ace the Data Science Interview. I feel like people wait too long to like get in front of employers and start putting themselves out there. And it's okay to go fail some interviews. If anything, it actually makes you feel good in the sense that it's not so bad. The world doesn't end. It's good to like try out a few interviews and see what happens, because you don't know if you know everything you need to know until you put yourself out there and ask, you network with someone and ask like, hey, like, can I interview for this position? Like, what do you think? So that's a big part of startup philosophy, is that don't wait to ship a product until it's perfect. You should be embarrassed by your V1 of the product. That's what they say in the startup world. What does that mean for your career? It means, listen, you're going to be a little bit scrubby when you do your first interview. You might not think you're a perfect fit for that job, right? But it's up to you to apply for that job, because I remember being kind of scrubby when I did my first data science internship. Same way with my software engineering job. Same way when I became a marketer, right? I became a marketer without any marketing experience. I was definitely a scrub. And I think being able to be okay with that and put yourself out there is something really key. And then of course, none of this matters. Like if you keep failing interviews, what's the point? Unless you learn from them, right? So that's like the last key, is that you reflect on whether you're weak on portfolio projects or the behavioral interview or your technical skills. But whatever it is, you reflect on it and then you restart on the build and like make sure you build it up. So that's kind of how we think about approaching jobs, and a good framework for you to get your first job, even without any experience. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. We can talk about this for a second. I may have put these slides a little bit out of order. Kevin, you want to just talk about for a second? Like, I think some of you guys know about this, and of course our book has a bunch of chapters dedicated to each topic, but Kevin, you want to say something about this?
Yeah, sure. So I guess generally speaking, data science interviews are pretty diverse. So it really sort of, depends on the company that you're interviewing at and sort of like the job specs on the type of job. So obviously, people kind of get this idea of, oh, you need a master's or a PhD because, there are certain companies, for example, Netflix is one where they hire more like senior people, and those people are often well-versed in ML. And so, whereas on the other hand, for example, Facebook is one of a couple companies that likes to hire new grads in kind of more product analytics roles. And those two are, pretty different skill sets, right? One is kind of more broad and the other is very narrow. So I think, this is obviously not every single possible topic area that could be covered, but this is, predominantly, I would say it covers 90+% of what I've seen and, what people that we know have seen. And so, all of these can be kind of, business and product cases is a little less, it's kind of more like intuition / you kind of do some practice and kind of learn on your own. Like it might not be, taught in a textbook, in a classroom somewhere, but for the most part, the rest of the topics are, and coding is technically in there as well. Those topics can be kind of, learned online, learned in classes and things like that. So yeah.
Cool. We can go to the next slide. So I just want to talk about this for a second, right? This is something that I haven't put out in a blog post yet, but it's informed by talking to about 15 different hiring managers in the last 3 weeks. And basically the question is, how do you ace the behavioral interview specifically for data scientists? So if you go to the next slide. what I figured out for you guys, for you undergrads, right, in data science, or, you know, people who don't have 10 years industry experience, the number one thing that they're looking for is for you to show potential. And almost every interview question is almost asked so that you can showcase a different way of how much potential you have. Okay. So I talked to these hiring managers, and basically the consensus was, look, we could maybe hire someone with like 6 years industry experience, or we could hire someone with a PhD. But if we're going to go out of our way and hire someone with a bachelor's in data science, what we're looking for is not just where they are in terms of their skills right now, it's how fast they're going to grow. Because it's not going to be worth investing my time in mentoring or hiring somebody if they don't show a willingness to learn. So basically, almost every behavioral interview question that we figured out was them trying to figure out, how fast will you learn, and are you hungry to learn? Because we don't expect you to know everything. And that's actually why undergrads in data science do get hired. You don't know everything, because in the real world, well, most people don't know everything, which is okay. But, you know, if you're a new grad, you probably know less than an industry hire, but that's okay as long as you're learning fast. And ways to show that specifically, right, is be able to show a portfolio project, something you've done on your own, not a class project, not a Kaggle competition like the Titanic data set that everyone's seen, not like that MNIST handwriting digit recognition project that we might have all done with TensorFlow and Keras, right? Do something that you're actually passionate about, something that shows like, oh, wow, like, you know, this guy on his own went and built a project and brought his data skills to a real life problem, and because he was interested, right? Because if you're interested in this stuff in your free time, that's a great indicator that you'll be amazing at the job and learn fast. Other thing that they kind of ask for is, in one way or another, they ask like, who do you follow, or what are you reading? What books have you read? What papers have you read? What newsletters are you on, right? So I guess that's another way that shows potential, is that in your free time, you're going out of your way to learn more about data science, right? So I'm not saying that there's one magical answer. Here's the blog you need to read to get a job. Nothing like that. But that's just a good way of showing an employer like, oh yeah, actually, like, I care about this stuff in my free time. Yeah, I know it's hard to make free time, but that's how it be. And then product knowledge, that's another one, right? I'm sure you guys have probably seen this, right? A lot of data science is, of course, about hard technical skills, but so much real data science is about solving a real business problem, or learning something about the domain you're in, and then applying your quantitative background to that specific problem, right? So guess what? You know, an industry hire with 5 years experience, they may know statistics just as good as you because you just took your stat class last semester. Maybe they may even know statistics a little bit worse because you just took the class and you memorized a bunch of stuff for the final exam, which you crushed. You know, you might know more stat than them, right? But the experience really comes with like, oh, you know what? This person's been working in healthcare for the last 5 years at 2 different companies. I bet that this data science can solve our healthcare problem. And sure, maybe that data scientist uses linear regression, which is what you were going to use too, because it's a simple technique. And maybe we all know about linear regression. But really, that where that experience and shines is in that domain knowledge. So how do they figure out, like, is this person that we're interviewing not just good at statistics, but someone who might become good at our domain, right? And it's to show interest for that domain and to show interest for that product if you're applying to a product-based company. And so let's say you're applying to Facebook. It doesn't just mean though, like, oh yeah, I use Facebook a ton, so I'm a good fit for Facebook, or I use Instagram a ton. It really becomes about like, okay, what do I know about social companies? What do I know about product management for consumer startups or for consumer products? You know, how do people refer people to a social product? What are some of the metrics that you think Facebook cares about when they're working on ad fraud, right? It's showing that kind of curiosity that is a really good signal for an employer that like, hey, you know what? This person knows some statistics from school. Maybe they don't have 5 years of experience, but this person's actually really interested in like knowing, how does Facebook build products? And I bet that they would do a great job of using data to inform our roadmap because they care about building products and they know something about data so they can get the job done. So I think that's another way that people early in their careers can really show their potential, is to actually do your company research, do your homework about what's the product you'd be working on. And then lastly, you've probably heard of that. A lot of those questions are about like, tell me about a challenge you face in the workplace or something like that, right? Honestly, what they're looking for a lot of the time, I mean, sure, they're looking for if you're a team player or anything. I don't know how exactly they evaluate that because I feel like everyone kind of sells the same stories. But really what I found to be a good story is when you make it around how resourceful you are, right? Because they want to hire people who are really hungry to go out of their way and learn and solve a problem, because that's why you're being hired, not to do math, but to solve business problems. So, if resourcefulness doesn't even have anything to do with business, but just something you've done in your own life, like, oh, I figured out how to go to college for free by applying to like 56 college loan programs. That's great. That shows you're resourceful, because I bet you're going to try 56 things to solve this business problem. So that's kind of my take on the whole behavioral interview. So hopefully that was helpful. And, because we wrote a very technical book, so I figured we'd balance this out with one quick slide here. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so now we can just open it up in the chat. Go ahead, ask us some questions about our background. You can find more about us on LinkedIn. You can read our blogs, but yeah, this is your time. Ask Kevin and I some questions, and we're happy to rant.
So one of the questions that came up when you were just going over that last slide, when you were talking about the importance of domain knowledge, and that's something that the undergraduate program focuses on as well. We've done a recent curriculum revision where we've kind of built in these different tracks at the lower division level that will then lead to further exploring that at the upper division level with in-depth electives. And something that a lot of students kind of get stuck in is, how do I choose? How do I know what domain's the right domain? So could you talk a little bit about that while we wait for some more questions to come in through the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you my take. Do whatever you like. It really doesn't matter too much. Your career is long. I guess the bigger thing the meta skill, you don't want to, let's say you're into natural language processing, right? It's great to become an expert at that. But the more interesting thing is, you should be trying to learn how to be good at learning things, right? That's kind of the important thing. So how do you become good at NLP? You do some projects in that field. You read some books. You subscribe to a journal. You talk to a few NLP people, and you go cold email a few people in the industry. It's okay if NLP isn't the space you're going to be operating in 3 years from now. The bigger thing was that you went through the steps of actually learning a domain, because it gives you the confidence that, like, listen, I don't know much about computer vision, but I already know about NLP. I could probably learn computer vision, or I could learn quant finance because I already know stats. So I think that my answer is maybe a cop-out, which is, it doesn't really matter as long as you are doing a good job at whichever domain that catches your eye. Kevin, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think before, I mean, the nice part about being early in your career is that you have optionality in trying out different sort of domains, right? So I was at Facebook for a little bit over a year, and currently I'm in finance, been there for not yet 2 but almost 2, and obviously they're very different, but I've enjoyed both in very different ways. And so I think as Nick was kind of saying, like, I think it's kind of your job, the younger you are, the kind of the more time you have to kind of try out different things. And as Nick was saying, like, good quantitative skills are always applicable to any industry. So if you if you can, you should try interning. Let's say you're interested in like 3 different types of domains. Maybe you're interested in healthcare, finance, and tech. Like, I would recommend trying different internships in all of them. And a career is really long, and generally speaking, like, if you can kind of deliver value in tech, you can also deliver it in finance. You can also deliver in healthcare. And so I think basically, try out as much as you can, and then kind of just, I would say, go with the flow is kind of my advice.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a boomer or something, but I guess I just turned 25, right? And I'm already on kind of, I did 2 careers, right? One as a software engineer at Facebook, one as a marketer at a startup. And now I'm writing a book and I'm working on a startup myself. So it's kind of like, it's really tough to predict the future. And focusing on these meta skills or focusing on how to learning how to learn or getting good at anything you put your mind to it is kind of the bigger skill I think people should be working on, because technology moves fast. These frameworks move fast. We might be doing all kinds of different things 10 years from now. So really you have to focus on those fundamental building blocks of how do you provide value to people in any field through quantitative measures. I think when we were at Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, who is the COO of Facebook, she went to, Kevin, did she go to Penn? I feel like she went to Penn.
I feel like I would have known if she did, but
Maybe she went to Harvard. I think she went to Harvard. I think that's what it was.
yeah.
But she basically said when she was graduating from Harvard, Mark Zuckerberg was in preschool, right? So she had her whole life planned ahead, and she was going to go work as a consultant at McKinsey, and she knew everything she was going to do. But like Mark, who made Facebook, was in preschool, and she was graduating Harvard, right? So it's like, it's really tough to predict the future and how things will go. And that's why it's really key to focus on building blocks. And I think early on in your career, it definitely feels overwhelming. Like, how do I know if I'm doing the right thing? How do I know if I'm on the right path? And almost always my advice is just do more things. Like, that's the bigger thing. You have to focus on output. How fast can you learn? How much can you produce? Because it matters less on what it's on. Yeah. So we got a lot of questions rolling in through.
Yeah,
Kevin,
so,
you want to pick
Should we just go through them one by one?
No, we should pick the ones that we like.
Okay.
That are interesting, Kevin. Which one do you like?
The first one I see is, what are some industry blogs or books that you would recommend? I have like a quick one on this one. So no, I don't follow too many in particular. Like, obviously Medium has like Towards Data Science, which, there are definitely articles, and I've written, on there, but also I kind of follow articles here and there. But I think an interesting source that is probably overlooked is companies have their own blogs. So for example, like Uber and Lyft and, Facebook all have data science related blogs. And there's a lot of interesting, not only do they usually mention like the research that they participate in, but also like basically you can kind of see at a high level, like how certain business areas were built. I think that's pretty fascinating. And so, Uber will talk about, hey, how they, went from, hey, we were, originally we only had like 1 terabyte of data, and we were kind of just using like Postgres, and now we kind of have way too much data, and it's the sort of the whole architecture of that. And then along with like they'll cover like, hey, here's some like here's some like rideshare algorithms that we've worked on, kind of blending in kind of like the very quantitative side, and also like some economics and game theory side. So I think those are underappreciated resource, and I would definitely recommend, especially if you're wanting to work at various big tech companies. Like, a lot of companies have really awesome blogs. Books wise, I don't have too many off the top of my head. I think honestly, like, it depends on what you like. If you love reading about ML, for example, there are various cornerstone ML books, pattern recognition, machine learning, for example. Or there's a lot of like sort of fundamental statistics and probability textbooks, but those are kind of like textbooks. I think in terms of like fictional stories, super forecasting is great. There's a couple, I guess I could see a couple. I don't have any like off the top of my head really, but those are just throwing some names out there. I would also recommend, I've gotten really into podcasts when I used to do my commute in New York. And one of the podcasts I listen to is called This Week in ML. So it's TWIML, TWIML, and they talk about a lot of still high level, but like they go pretty they go somewhat specific on various like ML papers and things like that. So I think that's a really interesting source as well.
Cool. I see some questions about portfolio projects, right? How many do you need? Bailey asks. Honestly, 1. one really good one. You're better off spending your time working on something that's really interesting and doing a really good job end to end than trying to do five different topics. So really, you just need to start with one. For me, so for me, I'll give you an example, right? In college, my big thing was this startup I created called rapstock.io. So I'm big into hip hop music, as is Kevin. Maybe he'll freestyle rap for you at the end of this call because he's a good freestyle rapper. So we're both into hip hop, and I also DJ for fun, right? So I'm big into understanding, oh, I like this artist, or I like being a tastemaker for music. So I went out of my way and made this thing called rapstock.io, which is kind of like fantasy football for rappers. You'd bet on who's going to do well and who's not going to do well. And just like in fantasy football, you earn points based on who you drafted onto your team. You earn points in my game based on who does well or not on Billboard and Spotify data. Yeah, who does well commercially based on stream counts, right? So I made this thing. I made an algorithm to price these assets. I made it a game. I got it to 2,000 monthly active users. And I just really loved it, right? So now when I go to interviews and I start sitting across Facebook and I'm interviewing with a few people on Facebook's growth team, and they're asking me like, hey, tell me about a time like you grew a consumer product or something. Like, why are you into this stuff? I'm able to weave a story of how I was a DJ that led me to this college startup, that led me to combine my love of data and try to price these rappers, and brought in my love of consumer products and social products, aka it's a game. And then I grew it to 2,000 monthly active users, and I struggled to get it to that number. And I learned a lot about growth engineering, which is why I'm talking to you now on Facebook's growth team, right? So do you see how like doing that one deep project was able to like perfectly position me for Facebook's growth team? But here's the thing. You might be thinking like, oh, you got lucky. You did that one project, you ended up at Facebook, right? There's a way to twist that story to join Uber's growth team or to join Uber's supply matching team, right? So I talk about, hey, I made an algorithm to price rappers, and that's similar to making an algorithm to match, like to figure out who's a good person to pick up and how much we should price this ride, and match that with consumers and match that with drivers, right? So what I'm trying to say is like, that's how you really win these interviews, and that's how you really make your cold emails sing. It's when it's like you were perfect for the job because you, in your own free time, without anyone telling you to do anything, you did X, Y, and Z all about your passion. So now you suddenly look passionate. You look like a self-starter. You look like you're perfect for this company. You've clearly shipped something, right? Because you usually put a link to what you've made, which is a key thing, right? Link to your GitHub, link to your Kaggle notebook, right? Whatever it is, you want to link to that. And suddenly, and you talk about that in like 3 sentences. If you email that to a recruiter, you email that to a hiring manager, you're going to get hear back from. So that's my big rant on how many portfolio projects do you need? Really, honestly, just one really good one. Necessarily skills to build your own portfolio project. I talk a little bit more about that in my guide, like how to build kick-ass portfolio projects. But honestly, you can get really far with just using Excel, right? In high school statistics, AP stats, and Excel, you can go really far, right? There's a lot of data sets out there, and it's, again, real world data science is about not just doing modeling, but then pitching that and showing that to a decision maker. So even if you don't make any complicated models and you're just doing some summary statistics, if you're able to like present that in an interesting, neat way, like make an infographic or make a GIF out of that data, that's a cool portfolio project. So let's say you want to be a data scientist at NASA. There's this data set of astronauts. I think there's 384 of them. And what they studied in school, their height, their age, how old they were, how many times they went to the moon, blah, blah, blah. So there's 384 rows. It fits in Excel. You could make a really cool infographic where you just, manually group them by their majors and show like, oh, here's what to study if you want to be an astronaut, right? And then you go send that project to NASA, be like, hey, I'm in college. I want to know how to be an astronaut. So I looked at what astronauts studied, and it turns out they studied mechanical engineering. So, well, sucks, but I'm a data scientist, but can I be a data scientist at NASA? I'm going to respond to that email if you're a hiring manager, right? Because it shows your passion, and it's not very technically complex, but it's still more than what most people will do, honestly. if you're making these projects, you're already pretty far off. So that's why there's no real skill prerequisite. Kevin, do you want to answer a question?
Yeah. I mean, let's see which questions.
So I guess Adi, one of the things, Adi wrote, he's finding it tough to get interview callbacks being a mechanical engineer, right? So one of the things I would think about is, how do they know that you're a mechanical engineer? When you send a cold email, you don't have to say you're a mechanical engineer. You just say you go to UCSD, great school. You made this project in your ML grad course, and I'm really interested in working on Uber's driver algorithm team. They don't even realize that you're a mechanical engineer, especially if you link to your portfolio project. Now, of course, I'm definitely making it too simple, and definitely it may hurt a little bit, but there's definitely ways, and maybe you can talk about it later, but there's definitely ways to make it like, not emphasize that you're a mechanical engineer. Another one on your resume, right? They often say lead with your education. Well, why don't you lead with your ML portfolio project and make your education at the bottom, and don't highlight that you're in the UCSD class of 2022. But you don't have to BS in mechanical engineering, minor in something, but you don't have to make the central focus right at the top. I'm a mechanical engineer trying to be a data scientist, right? So there's ways to like kind of delay that. So that's like my practical thing there. Kevin, do you have a good idea on which question you want to answer?
Well, just to follow up on that question, I think since Adi, since you also mentioned the question, you've taken a lot of grad ML courses and did well on them, I think you should definitely leverage that, right? Like there are, as Nick said, there are a lot of overused common projects on common data sets, but, sort of if you have the ML expertise and, some area a little more, that's a little more niche, you can definitely like whip up like an amazing project that would definitely catch, the hiring manager, whoever's eye, right? And so I think you should, definitely leverage that. And kind of like, I guess, there are obviously a lot of data sets out there, probably more than anyone, ever knows, but you could also like, if you don't want to find data, you could also like scrape data, right? So you can kind of, it's pretty simple to learn, and you can kind of, scrape data from a lot of places. And so basically there's really no excuse to like not really having enough data for a project. Now, obviously, depending on what kind of ML problem you're doing, you might need like a lot of data. And if that data is really, really niche or hard to get or expensive or whatever it is, then obviously that's like a constraint. But beyond that, like I think sort of it's an open playing field. So
yeah. And the last thing is, if you make your project on something tangentially related to Mech-E, you could tell a story like, hey, look, I know I'm a mechanical engineer. I did this project as a mechanical engineer. I fell in love with data science, so I took grad ML classes, and I want to be a machine learning person. That's actually a good story, and here's the reason why. I'd rather hear about someone who started somewhere else and then went out of their way to really learn a lot about it than someone's like, oh, I wanted to be an ML engineer because everyone around me is an ML engineer and I heard they get paid really well, right? So you actually have a story to tell and leverage, and you will be able to bring unique insight to something. So yeah, I think there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of things you can do. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. I'll answer Peter's question, right? Big company versus smaller company. Something I think about a lot. Big companies are great, lots of perks, good pay, good credentials, and I don't want to lie and pretend like it doesn't help those credentials. Smaller companies, of course, you might get to do a lot more. So it's definitely a tough thing to figure out, but I would say if I had to pick like a Goldilocks thing for at least tech startups or like in the technology industry, I would say that like Series C companies, Series D are awesome if you're looking to be a data scientist at a tech company or startup. Series C and Series D companies have lots of funding, usually maybe somewhere between like $30 and $150 million. So you'll still get paid pretty well. And they're pretty well known. So maybe they're not as well known as Facebook or something, but like people in the Valley would have heard of those companies. and they're usually growing fast. So there's a lot of opportunities to learn. And if you join, you can go on a website called Crunchbase and look at startups backed by Sequoia, for example. They're one of the top venture capital firms in the Bay. If you go down that list of companies that are backed by Sequoia or Greylock or KPCB at the Series C or Series D financing, you basically found a pretty de-risked startup where you're going to get to learn a lot, make decent money, and if it fails, a lot of those coworkers that you worked with are going to then go with you, bring you to your next gig, because those people are very highly employable. So that's my take on it. I'm definitely becoming more of a smaller company person just because I have entrepreneurial bent. So yeah, but even big companies are okay, honestly, as your first gig. I would just say don't get too comfy. Like, I know the perks at Google and Facebook look really nice, and they actually kind of are, but they kind of wear off pretty fast, right? So I was at Facebook like a year and a month. I got sick of it after a while. And sure, the free food was nice, but like, it doesn't really help for if that's not what you want to do. It doesn't really help. Yeah.
Just to super quickly add on to that. So, totally agree with everything Nick said. I think in terms of like, doing data science at a smaller company versus like a larger company, I think at most larger companies, because there have already been, loads of engineers working on infrastructure for you, like well before you don't ever need to have to build anything from scratch, right? So if you need an A/B test done, if you need to run some kind of ML pipeline, it's always going to be plugging and playing into the existing ecosystem. And that is very different depending on what like stage of a startup you're at. Obviously, kind of at the C to D range, which Nick talked about, like there's probably going to be definitely some infrastructure. But if you go to like a very early startup or just like a very small company, there will definitely be times where you might take on a lot of data engineering kind of responsibilities, right? Because there is no data science per se without having the data in the correct places and cleaned and all this, right? So that's kind of something to just be aware of. And I think once again, I also kind of skew in favor of smaller companies just because I kind of like to kind of see the kind of full stack work. At Facebook and other places like Facebook, you definitely work on a very very specialized like in a very specialized kind of area. And so I guess the bright side of that is obviously like it takes a lot of work to build up like a proper A/B testing platform, for example, right? Or building up proper ML infrastructure is a lot of work. It requires much more than just data scientists, a lot of engineers, just a lot of people. So there's kind of like two sides, but I think like the learning experience is really good for smaller companies. So it just depends on where you're at in life.
Kevin, do you want to take Eric's question about breaking out of big tech data science and more into quantitative research? Even though we
Sure.
can talk a little bit about the Wall Street stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, full disclaimer, I'm not really a quantitative researcher per se. I think the question, I mean, in terms of
what are you, Kevin? I never understood your title.
It's just data science.
Scientist at a hedge fund. Okay.
Yeah. I think I think one of the differences is often in finance. It really depends, but like especially for quantitative research positions, like they are very focused on just very focused on the technical side, right? So they tend to hire people that are very good at statistics, right? Math, coding, things like that. And so I would say there's definitely overlap for sure. I've sort of had interviews on the whole spectrum from like, kind of product analytics to like, machine learning engineering to like quantitative research to just the whole kind of mix. And I would say definitely quantitative research is very, it's kind of like the most demanding from just a technical interview perspective usually. Meaning like if you think about the broad areas that we kind of mentioned in the slide earlier, where you need to know like, hey, we need to know some probability, you know some statistics and some ML and some coding. I would say like for like an interview like Facebook, right, where I mean obviously there's different types of roles at Facebook, but if we're talking about sort of like new grad product analytics, it's very much like a breadth heavy and not depth heavy role. So my interview like process was very kind of, I got asked a bunch of different areas, but not anything super deep in any one of the areas. Whereas in quantitative research, it's, very deep in some area of statistics or math or coding or whatever it is, usually in all of them, by the way. So I think like in terms of breaking into them, it's just a lot of technical prep. It's kind of, I would say that process is pretty close. I've done, ML engineer kind of interviews as well. And I would say ML engineer and quantitative research are pretty close. Both are, you need to know a good amount of stats, ML, coding. So I would say basically just focus on those areas and, kind of get deep in the technical knowledge there. It's a little harder to build. I don't think for those types of roles, they're not to say that they don't value the projects as much. They definitely do. But I think like it's one of those things where they have a much higher bar for the technical screening side of things. So even if you have a kick-ass project and you get the interview and whatever, if you can't answer, let's say like they throw some some DP question that you just happen to blank out on, right? If you can't answer it, like their tolerance for letting you pass is a lot lower than other roles.
And I guess that's why, I guess maybe we glossed over the whole thing, right? What's our book called? Ace the Data Science Interview. And 3/4 of that book is real questions and answers from top tech companies as well as finance firms on probability, statistics, ML, SQL, and these techniques of like getting a good portfolio project, cold emailing and making good portfolio projects are to help you get to that technical interview. But once you're in that technical interview, it's your hard skills that are going to get you past it, as well as, doing lots of practice, which is why our book is literally questions from D, Shaw, Two Sigma, Facebook, Google, and the like. So yeah, even though that's not like the main thing we've talked about today, that's kind of one thing I definitely want to emphasize is that like a lot of it is about the hard tech skills, which you can improve through practice by going through our 201 questions that we put out there.
Cool. I just wanted to go over one quick question. I know from last week's event, this question was asked before, but I figured that it'd be more appropriate to ask you two these. But can you please go over the data science recruitment timeline and if there's any similarities or differences with software engineering?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that like I don't have a good answer to that. I guess the timelines now do things early and then keep doing them until you have a job. So I don't know how helpful that is, but I think that's kind of the truth that like companies are hiring right now, and if they're not hiring right now, then they're going to be hiring next month, and if they don't hire next month, they're going to hire in January. Internships, January is a good time to find them, earlier is the better, right? If something's open, that means you should go apply to them. And at least for new grads, lots of stuff is already open. So yeah, I guess timeline, I don't know what you're looking for there, but I would just say it's like all open right now and go apply. So
as a quick comment on that, I feel like, I did the whole SWE loop just like Nick did back in college. It's definitely not at a place where like I think SWE's gotten pushed back earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
I don't think data science is there yet, so I don't really think it's the same timeline, but generally like you always want to be prepared. So yeah.
But basically this fall. So if it's not right now, Kevin, it's definitely going to be there. You were definitely doing interviews in October and November, right? When you were in college?
Yeah, my story's a little weird actually. But they can be in the fall, even in the spring.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there's like it's definitely, but I do remember in my 4 years at Penn, definitely like it seemed like the software engineering kind of, just because there were so many, and you could just look at the numbers for people taking like CS 100 or whatever, right? Like the number of people going in was just like increasing so much year on year that like, sort of the timelines and, all this campus recruiting stuff, like people just getting, preparing and interviewing early and early. And that kind of does affect campus recruiting a little. I don't think I saw the same thing for data science because it's also definitely like, kind of back to the question, like data science means a lot of different things at different places. It's not it hasn't been as standard of a interview process yet, obviously, as software engineering, right? Where you can, people kind of know certain resources or whatever, and they kind of practice very specific problems and all this, right? So I don't think it's there yet, but we'll see.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. And I think we can squeeze in one last question. Another one that we had was for us undergraduate students trying to find these opportunities or internships that are available. What do you recommend is the best way to find what we're eligible for, where the opportunities are?
So I guess this is a shameless plug, but something I've been working on the side is called Massaply.com. And it's a platform built to help you find open roles, open internships, and open new grad roles, as well as kind of manage your applications and then cold email the hiring manager directly, so you don't have to look up who the hiring manager is. So that's just something I've been doing on the side. So I'm going to plug that. Outside of that, Kevin, do you have any ideas? I was just using like normal job boards like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, AngelList. AngelList is pretty good if you're into tech startup stuff, but I don't think of anything.
Yeah, I think just the usual stuff, honestly, whatever, LinkedIn, definitely like LinkedIn, Angel.co, like AngelList. Obviously utilize your campus and, maybe you have friends who know people at various companies. I think like,
yeah, use alumni thing. This is something that I didn't do a good job of, and I'm sure Margaret's gonna say this is a good idea as well. Like, go on LinkedIn, go look up UCSD, and then go click alumni. Okay, there's this whole UI widget that I didn't even know about until after I graduated college. Once you look up the alumni, you can go find alumni based on what they studied and what year they graduated or what company they work at. So now very quickly, and UCSD is a big school, you guys have been around, it's a great school, you guys have alumni everywhere. So pretty much for any tech company or any startup that you want to reach out to, you should be able to find a UCSD person, and you may just even find a UCSD like computer science or data science. I know data science is a little bit newer, but a math or computer science or stat major, you're going to find someone. So I would say leverage those to figure out how to break into those companies, because I feel like I'm able to find where these jobs are. The harder thing is like, how do you actually break in? And it's through cold emailing your connections or alumni or the hiring manager itself with your portfolio project. And that's usually the best way I've found. Cool, guys. I know we're at time. I'm going to say, be sure to check out our book when it's out in about 2 weeks. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. You can go on my blog, nicksing.com, where I've already written about some of these things, and I put those links out there for about portfolio projects. And I also run a newsletter subscribed to by 45,000 people with monthly career advice. It's just one email a month. You should definitely join that. You should join Kevin's. Kevin, you want to talk about ACE the data science? Or
datascienceprep.com. It's just like a weekly newsletter. Thanks everyone for kind of staying with us. Thanks Margaret and Ayush for kind of hosting. And I guess like I'll leave one quick super fun bonus problem for you guys that are still listening. I got asked this like years ago at Facebook, but I thought it was just a really fun problem, which was, let's say that you have an option to play 2 games. So you can either play a game where you roll 2 die at once, and you get the sort of the product in a dollar payoff. You get the product of the 2 dice faces, right? Or you can roll 1 dice and get the square on that face value. Which one would you rather play and why? And there's like a really neat 10-second solution, which obviously I did not get during the interview, but it's a fun problem regardless. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you both so much. If we can give like a virtual round of applause for Kevin and Nick. Thank you so much for the insight that you had to share. So we have been recording this presentation. It will eventually be updated to the Collegiate Data Science Institute website. Ayush will be sharing it through the DS3 communications, and I will also be sharing it on Monday through the weekly data science newsletter that is sent to all declared majors and minors and prospective students. If you're not already subscribed, feel free to do that through our HDSI website, and make sure that you attend the last workshop of our Ramp Up for Recruitment series happening next Wednesday at 3 p.m., where I'll be leading a craft and effective elevator pitch workshop in preparation for then the larger UCSD Science and Technology Career Fair on October 7th, leading up to then the Data Science Talent Day on October 15th. So thank you again, Nick and Kevin, so much. Thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome, guys. Thanks for having us. I dropped like 10 links right now in the chat. So
Perfect.
All right. Thanks
Great.
for having us,
Thanks so
guys.
much.